Imagine waking up to news headlines announcing global markets rattled, economists baffled, and politicians outraged, all because of a single tariff formula. Yes, a formula devised by none other than former President Donald Trump. But what exactly is this formula? How does it work? Why was it implemented? And what hidden truths might we have overlooked? In the latest wave of trade disruptions, former President Donald Trump introduced a groundbreaking tariff formula that took the world by surprise. But how exactly does this Trump tariff formula work? Why was it implemented? And what critical details might we have overlooked? Let's delve deep into Trump's tariff strategy, unravel the complexities, and understand the real story behind it. On a dramatic Wednesday evening from the iconic Rose Garden, Trump flipped around a placard revealing his administration's new tariffs. While tariffs themselves weren't surprising, the method used, dubbed the Trump tariff formula, was certainly unconventional. At its core, Trump's administration calculated tariffs based primarily on trade balances, rather than the previously stated goal of matching existing tariff rates and barriers imposed by other countries. Here's how it worked. First, Trump's team took a country's trade surplus with the US and divided it by that country's total exports to America. They then halved that result to achieve what Trump labeled a discounted reciprocal tariff. For example, China had a massive trade surplus with the US of $295 billion last year on total exports amounting to $438 billion. That gives us a surplus ratio of about 68%. Dividing that by 2, Trump arrived at a tariff rate of 34%. This same approach set tariffs for economies like Japan, South Korea, and the European Union. Even nations where the US had a trade surplus or balanced trade faced a flat 10% tariff rate, creating confusion and uncertainty in global markets. The White House claimed that calculating tariffs individually based on specific barriers, like taxes, currency manipulations, and non-tariff barriers, was impractical due to the sheer complexity involved. The administration stated openly, while individually computing the trade deficit effects of tens of thousands of tariff, regulatory tax, and other policies in each country is complex, if not impossible, their combined effects can be proxied by computing the tariff level consistent with driving bilateral trade deficits to zero. Simply put, Trump's tariffs were designed primarily to reduce US trade deficits quickly, rather than addressing individual trade practices directly. Interestingly, Trump's initial instructions, given in a February memorandum, did not explicitly mention trade balances as a primary calculation method. Instead, it highlighted tariffs, taxes, non-tariff barriers, currency manipulations, and other unfair limitations on market access. Yet, when the tariffs finally emerged, the administration leaned heavily on trade balances. So why the sudden pivot? Experts suggest Trump's administration realized that using trade balances as a primary determinant was simpler, faster, and politically clearer for messaging to the American public. By directly connecting tariffs to trade deficits, Trump made the complicated world of international trade digestible and politically appealing to his voter base. Trump's announcement didn't come without confusion. Notably, there were discrepancies between the rates Trump displayed publicly and those listed in the annex accompanying his executive order. For instance, South Korea appeared at 25% on Trump's placard, but at 26% in the official documents. This inconsistency raised critical questions about the calculation's transparency and accuracy. Critics argue that such inconsistencies undermine confidence in the tariffs and might spark retaliatory measures from affected countries. An overlooked but intriguing detail lies in Trump's inclusion of 2 additional parameters in his formula: price elasticity of import demand and the elasticity of import prices with respect to tariffs. Interestingly, these parameters were set in a manner that mathematically canceled each other out. Essentially, they multiplied to 1, rendering their inclusion symbolic rather than practical. This hidden complexity suggests Trump's administration might have initially sought to present a sophisticated economic justification for the tariffs, but ultimately defaulted to a simpler, politically more potent narrative. While Trump's tariff formula was clear and straightforward in its intention, reducing U.S. trade deficits, the consequences are complex. Economists widely agree that targeting trade deficits alone oversimplifies global economics, neglecting supply chain disruptions, increased costs for U.S. businesses and consumers, and potential retaliatory tariffs. Businesses importing essential goods from tariffed countries suddenly faced significant cost hikes. For example, U.S. industries reliant on Chinese steel and electronic components experienced immediate financial stress, negatively impacting profitability and employment. Furthermore, affected countries, China, the EU, and South Korea, quickly signaled retaliatory measures. History shows us clearly, trade wars rarely end well for anyone. Ironically, Trump's simplified tariff formula inadvertently penalized countries where the U.S. had balanced or even surplus trade relationships, imposing a flat 10% rate regardless of their favorable economic interactions. Critics argue this sends mixed signals, punishing allies and neutral partners alike, potentially harming diplomatic relations in the long run. Additionally, smaller economies that lacked significant trade surpluses or deficits with the U.S. found themselves disproportionately impacted, further complicating international diplomacy. Regardless of its practical flaws, Trump's tariff formula set a notable precedent. Future administrations might leverage similar simplified approaches to address complex economic issues, prioritizing political clarity over economic nuance. However, the long-term effectiveness of such tariffs remains questionable. Unless accompanied by robust diplomatic engagement and clearly targeted economic strategies, these measures might exacerbate economic tensions and global instability. Trump's tariff formula embodies his broader approach to policymaking: bold, simple, and politically compelling. But economic realities are rarely so straightforward. This episode reminds us that clarity in political messaging doesn't always equate to sound economic policy. By breaking down Trump's tariff strategy, we see a calculated gamble aimed at reshaping international trade quickly and decisively. Yet, the overlooked complexities and hidden costs underline the importance of nuanced economic understanding over politically expedient solutions. In short, Trump's tariff formula wasn't merely an economic policy, it was a political statement. And as history often shows, politics and economics are uneasy bedfellows.